For a long time, climate journalism and climate advocacy really suffered because people were scared to scare readers. And I say this as someone who was woken up to the story through fear. I think fear can be really useful. When the news from science is alarming, it's up to us as journalists to alarm people. It is dishonest to do otherwise. And the fact is that everything we know about what's coming down the way for us in the future is really scary. I basically spent a year or two just following the news from climate science. So that meant reading a lot of academic papers, talking to a lot of scientists, and processing it on my own. And pretty quickly I realized that the research about where we were headed made me more scared, made me more alarmed, made me feel like the problem was much more urgent than I'd really appreciated even just a few months before. I felt the deeper that I got into the material, the more time I spent thinking about how to best tell the story. I just felt that so much of what had been published was really handicapped by this unbelievably earnest caution about how to tell what is actually an incredibly cinematic, engaging, gripping saga that we're living through. You know, the incredible intensity of storms that we're likely to see throughout the Caribbean and in the Gulf Coast, the total transformation of the Midwest by new rain patterns and the effect that increased heat will have on agricultural yields, the droughts that we're likely to see across the American Southwest. There are these stories to tell all around the world, and yet the nightly news isn't willing to engage in any of those kinds of storytelling because they think people won't respond. But in my experience, the opposite has happened, that the more that you indulge the drama and scale and spectacle of climate change, the more that people do respond. I see a lot of progress in print media, a much more serious and honest climate coverage, a much bigger diversity of storytelling approaches. All of that is fantastic. TV is a very, very different story. Basically, none of the networks are covering climate at all. When they talk about natural disasters, they rarely connect the dots to climate change, and they almost never talk about climate change independent of those disasters. And I think that is absolutely catastrophic to public understanding. If I had to give them a grade, I would give them all Fs. I think it started to change in October 2018 with the UN IPCC report. It deployed a much more urgent rhetorical tone, which I think gave a kind of license to climate journalists, climate advocates, to be really forthright and honest about just how scary some of these scenarios could be. In the years since that report was released, we've seen an unprecedented political mobilization around climate. We've seen Greta Thunberg and her climate strike. She's mobilized millions of school children around the world. We've seen Extinction Rebellion. And in the US, we've had Sunrise, the Green New Deal. We now have a whole army of Democratic presidential contenders, each of whom are engaged in a kind of an arms race to see who can be the most ambitious when it comes to climate. That was unthinkable just a year or two ago. And I don't think it's at all a coincidence that we've seen all of that political movement because for the first time, scientists and their allies in the media were being honest about just what scale of crisis we truly face. Now, I don't think that means that fear and alarmism is the only way to talk about this story. I think there are many ways to talk about it. But personally, I'm someone who is motivated, mobilized, and activated by fear on this issue. And I think there are a lot more people like me